Good evening. This is Erin O'Toole, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I'm pleased to welcome you to our telephone town hall. We're also live on Facebook and YouTube. Tonight we're talking with people across Ontario about Canada's recovery plan. Our plan to get Canada's economy back on track and get Canadians back to work. You'll have a chance to ask me any question about this election, any question about Canada's recovery plan. All you have to do is hit *3 on your phone now. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, just use the comments to ask your question. I'm really proud to represent my hometowns in Parliament. I grew up in Bowmanville and Port Perry, Ontario. I've lived in the Toronto suburbs most of my life, other than when I was in the military and at law school. I know Ontario is a great place to live, work, and to raise your family. And that's why Rebecca and I chose to raise our kids in the same suburbs of the GTA that I grew up in. But I know that families across Ontario are worried about the future. They're worried about skyrocketing housing prices and the cost of living crisis. They're worried that their kid may never be able to afford a home in their own community. It's about time we had a Prime Minister that understands this, someone that's from Ontario and personally knows and understands the challenges facing our communities. As Prime Minister, I will be your voice in Ottawa. Remember, if you have any questions for me, Erin O'Toole, hit *3 or use our comments on Facebook or YouTube. 4 weeks ago, Justin Trudeau once again broke a promise to Canadians. In this case, it was his promise not to call an election during the pandemic. He's asking Canadians to give him a majority, but rather than presenting any sort of vision for the country over these last few weeks, Mr. Trudeau has engaged in a campaign of scaremongering, misinformation, and division. His negative American-style politics really should have no place in Canada. Canadians deserve better. You deserve better. Right from the start of this campaign, Canada's Conservatives have shown why we deserve your trust. The sole focus of our plan, Canada's recovery plan, is getting our economy and the wellness of our communities back on track. It's our plan to secure jobs by recovering the 1 million jobs we lost during the pandemic and more. It's about accountability by introducing tough new anti-corruption laws to clean up the mess in Justin Trudeau's Ottawa. It's about mental health by implementing our Canada Mental Health Action Plan. It's about the country by building up our capacity to respond to future threats and pandemics, to be more prepared. And finally, it's about the economy by balancing the federal budget over the course of the next decade, because it's wrong to leave such debt to our kids and grandkids, and Mr. Trudeau's reckless spending is causing inflation and the cost of living crisis. Canada's Conservatives will secure the future of every community across Ontario and across Canada. Ontario is my home, and I want to work with you to continue to make Ontario a great place to work, raise your family, and retire. So as I said, hit *3 now if you have a question for me, Erin O'Toole, leader of Canada's Conservatives, or comment on Facebook or YouTube in the comment section if you have a question. I'm very fortunate that this telephone town hall will be moderated by my good friend and the Conservative candidate for Leeds-Grenville-Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes, the great Michael Barrett. Take it away, Michael.
Well, as Erin said, my name is Michael Barrett, and I'm the candidate, and I've served as the MP in Leeds-Grenville-Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes. I'm going to be your moderator tonight, and I'm so excited to tell you about Erin O'Toole's vision for Canada and how I'm proud to support it. As he said, Erin was raised here in Ontario in Bowmanville with middle-class values of hard work and helping your neighbor. Before his career in politics, he served our country in the Royal Canadian Air Force for 12 years. Erin stands up for hardworking Canadians. He wants to work for you. And as a parent of two, he wants to make sure that for generations to come, Canadians can grow up with access to good jobs, quality health care, and a thriving economy. So our telephone town hall is about to start. So please press *3 to ask Erin O'Toole a question, or comment below if you're watching on Facebook. Again, if you have a question for Erin O'Toole, press *3 now, or leave your comment below. So we're going to get right into it, Erin, and our first question comes from Gord in Peterborough, and he wants to talk about the pandemic. Gordon, you are live with Erin O'Toole. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Gord.
Wish you all the best in this. Yeah, hi. Wish you all the best in this election. Just kind of wondering, right from the get-go, like a year ago, the Liberal government seemed to mess everything up right from the start. They denied it was going to be a problem in Canada, and they were late to the table in getting things organized. They took their time in implementing stuff, and it took them a year to figure out that maybe they should catch people coming in at the airports and at the borders to see if they were tested. Like, it was just late, and do nothing the whole time. And I'm just wondering what your government has learned from this, so that when the next pandemic comes around, that you'll be able to handle it better. And the other question I have is I understand that a group of I'm not sure who, but they created a playbook to go by for when different disasters happen, whether it's hurricane or whatever, hurricane or floods and even pandemics, but it wasn't even opened. So I'm wondering if you know about that and what your comments are. Thank you.
Well, what a great way to start, Gord. Thank you for the question. The pandemic. We're having an election in the fourth wave of the pandemic, something Mr. Trudeau said he'd never do. This is costing $600 million, Justin Trudeau's vanity election. I hope Canadians realize what we could do with $600 million. We could have been fighting and helping our hospitals. We could be tackling mental health, but Mr. Trudeau will always put himself first. And you're right, Gord, they were late. They were late at the border at the beginning of this crisis. They gave PPE and masks to China at a time we should have been building up our own supply. Before the pandemic started, they canceled the pandemic warning system that, since the SARS crisis, had been set up and was really a world leader in tracking risks of pandemics. So all of these late on rapid tests, partnering with a communist Chinese state-owned enterprise, CanSino, to create a vaccine, another misguided, slow response. That's why the fourth pillar of our plan, Gord, is to make sure we're never again unprepared for a pandemic. And what have we learned? Well, we've learned we have to have more self-reliance and capacity as a country. And this is the difference between a prime minister with not much experience that he's bringing, like Mr. Trudeau, or my experience in the military and the private sector, learning to adapt and be prepared. We will do that. And as you said, the playbook, you're 100% right. They did not follow some of the disaster planning guidance that the federal government had. So in our plan, in Canada's recovery plan, we actually are going to appoint a special advisor on disaster response to the Prime Minister's own office and the Privy Council office to make sure, whether it's pandemics, whether it's the raging forest fires in British Columbia that Mr. Trudeau ignored when he called the election, we need more preparedness as a country to make sure that as a G7 country, we're never again late, because it puts our people at risk. And I'd be remiss to not say Michelle Ferreri, our candidate in Peterborough, someone who comes from a farming background, an entrepreneur, someone who's been a passionate volunteer. I hope she can earn your trust. Thank you for the question, Gord.
So if you're just joining us, you are listening to a live telephone town hall with Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. If you want to ask him a question, press *3 on your phone now. Our next question comes from Sherry Lynn, and Sherry Lynn has a question about Conservative support for seniors. Go ahead, you're live now with Erin O'Toole.
Yes, good evening, Mr. O'Toole. My question is, we have always voted, my husband and I have always voted Conservative, always. We're actually in Michelle Ferreri's area also. And I've been communicating with her. The reason we're thinking going Liberal this time is Prime Minister Trudeau is the only one that has going to give anything to seniors, such as the 10% increase on their old age pension. And of everything I've listened to from you and everything I've read, I haven't seen a thing for seniors and to help them in their fixed incomes.
Well, thanks, Sherry Lynn. I need you to keep voting Conservative, and I want you to know that most of the programs and supports for seniors in the last decade have really come from the Conservative government, whether it was the creation of tax-free savings accounts, whether it was giving seniors a break, whether it was changing rules with respect to RIFs and other planning in retirement. We were the ones that made sure that seniors had more. We introduced pension income splitting, which allows you to save a little bit more. We're going to provide transitioning seniors a $1 an hour raise by doubling the Canada Workers Benefit. So many seniors will work a little less as they're approaching retirement. We're going to allow them to keep more of that money by doubling that benefit. We're going to increase home accessibility tax credits for folks to stay in their own home for up to $10,000. We're going to also increase the medical expense tax credit and make sure more people are able to qualify for the disability tax credit. We're putting in $3 billion to let the provinces renovate and modernize long-term care, and we're going to fight to protect pensions, because we've seen companies, whether it's Nortel or Sears, when companies go bankrupt, pensioners are at risk of losing their retirement. We're also going to keep the increases to the OAS, but all of these things are in addition to that, Sherry Lynn. We're also the only party helping get your bills down. We have a plan to get internet and cellular mobile phone bills down. We have a plan to get grocery bills down through a grocery code of conduct and going after price fixing. We also will give a GST holiday in December, a break that you can access if you shop in a bricks and mortar store. That will be the double benefit. We're going to help some of the retailers in Peterborough, Kawartha along the way. So we've got a lot of things in Canada's recovery plan for seniors, Sherry Lynn, and Mr. Trudeau, I don't believe earns your trust. He's broken many promises, broken many laws, ethics laws, countless times. We have a plan to get our country back on track and to stop the inflation mess that is caused by Mr. Trudeau spending hundreds of billions of dollars with no plan to ever stop.
If you have a question for the Leader of Canada's Conservatives, Erin O'Toole, press *3 on your phone to ask him live. Our next question comes from Paul about affordable housing. Paul, you can go ahead with your question for Erin now.
Thanks, and thanks for having this session. This is quite an interesting way to field some questions. Hey, my question is, I'm in my 50s. I own my home. But what I'm really concerned about is affordability of housing for my 3 children. They're aged 23 through 28. They all have really good paying jobs. They work hard. And my wife and I are doing everything that we can do to, raise money and help them be able to afford their houses. I was wondering, what ideas do you have to help, young millennials be able to get into their first house?
This is a great question, Paul, and your question reminds me of a question I had in one of these forums from a woman in Burlington who had the same concern. She has her house, but is worried that her kids cannot afford to buy a house, and we might have a whole generation, like your kids in their 20s, that are going to give up on home ownership. I will never give up on a generation of Canadians. The home ownership crisis has gotten worse every single one of Mr. Trudeau's 6 years. So we have a plan to tackle it. It's in here and it's comprehensive. First, we're going to ban foreign non-resident investors. This is driving up the cost, especially in the lower mainland of British Columbia and in southern Ontario. People that are using our housing market just to store their money. We're going to ban that for 2 years. We're also going to provide up to 15% of federal-owned lands and buildings to help with supply. We're going to accelerate the building through tying transit and other infrastructure investments where the federal government spends. We want to make sure that the municipalities and the provinces increase approvals for building as part of us spending that money. We're going to incentivize more rental housing being constructed. And for first-time home buyers, we want to make sure that the programs offered by Ottawa don't exclude large parts of the country like southern Ontario. We also want to make sure that for first-time home buyers, we modernize mortgages for the first time in really a generation, allowing them to lock in an interest rate for 8, 9, 10 years as opposed to 3, 4, or 5. Times have changed, and we don't want to give up on that generation. And And as you said, you're trying to help your kids as well. The federal government is one of the 3 levels of government that has a role to play here. We want to do our part. Mr. Trudeau has done nothing, and in fact, he voted against our measures to try and stop the foreign purchasing. We're going to move swiftly on this, Paul, because the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the affordability crisis is the top thing I hear, and we're the only ones with a plan to tackle it.
If you have a question for Erin O'Toole, the leader of Canada's Conservatives, press *3 on your phone now. Before we take our next question, I'm just going to find out from you what you're thinking at this point in the election. If you're planning to vote Conservative, you can press 1 on your keypad now. If you're going to vote for one of the other parties, press 2. And if you're still undecided, press 3. And if you have a question for Erin O'Toole, press *3, and we're going to get to those calls. And our next call comes from Bob, and Bob is wondering about our position on the carbon tax. Bob, you can go ahead and ask your question live now.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I was just wondering about the carbon tax, where you're going to go with it. Apparently, Mr. Trudeau is going to increase that tax in the next 4 or 5 years. And where will it put our country on a global footing with other countries to be able to compete? Thanks for taking my questions.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Bob. And you're absolutely right. Here's another broken promise of Justin Trudeau. When he said he was going to have a price for his carbon tax, he wouldn't increase it. He broke that promise. He's tripling it and will likely increase it even more. And for seniors, we heard Sherry Lynn talking about considering Justin Trudeau. Seniors can't afford constantly increasing taxes. They can't afford Mr. Trudeau trying to tax home equity, a whole range of things from folks that are on fixed income. So what we have offered in Canada's recovery plan is a different approach, something that prices carbon but doesn't pass your money to Ottawa in a tax. It allows people to get their own carbon footprint down by making green purchases with the carbon price, and the price we're using is a third of the price of Mr. Trudeau. I put this plan out, Bob, in April because I wanted to make sure that I showed there's another way to do this without a constantly rising carbon tax, because it's tough on seniors on fixed income and families raising kids. You hit the nail on the head on the business aspects. It's hard for Ontario-based businesses to compete when their rivals in Ohio or Pennsylvania or Michigan don't have a rising, ever-increasing Liberal carbon tax. So we need to make sure that we get our emissions down to meet our targets, but we don't lose thousands of jobs and investment opportunities in the process. So we took the time to get the balance right here because the environment is very important, but we have to make sure we have a strong economy. We roar back after COVID, because unless Canada has a strong economy, we can't actually tackle climate change and the other issues facing our country in 2021.
So for those of you just joining us, you're live listening to Conservative leader Erin O'Toole take questions. And if you have a question, please press *3 now. Our next question comes from Catherine in Carp, and it's about the availability of doctors in her community. Catherine, please go ahead. You're live with Erin now.
Thank you. There is an extreme shortage of family doctors, no matter where you are. I'm in Carp, which is part of Ottawa, and I've been printing off list after list on the computer. All these lists are mostly outdated. Either the family doctors are already retired or they're about to retire, especially with this COVID thing going on. And I was wondering, is there any incentives at all for students to go into doctory, or what can the government do to eliminate this problem of shortage? I've been checking since March because my doctor retired in June. I have a health issue, and I really, really need a family doctor.
Well, thanks, Catherine, for sharing something that really is concerning your family. That's exactly why we're calling and trying to be accountable to you. And I know where CARP is. I was there today, in fact, with our amazing candidate, Jennifer McAndrew, a business owner, a mom, an amazing candidate. She'll make a great member of Parliament. What we need to do is partner with the provinces so they can hire and train more doctors. It takes about 7 years to train and educate a doctor, lots of schooling and education, and that's done provincially. So Mr. Trudeau misleads people when he says, we're hiring doctors. No, he is not, unless he's talking about military doctors. That's the only area where the federal government might do that. So what we need is less misleading politics from Justin Trudeau and more partnering with the provinces. So what we have done in this campaign, and on the second day of the campaign, Catherine and I launched this document, we are making an historic investment in our public healthcare system, almost $60 billion over the course of the next decade. And why is that important? That gives increasing, predictable funding so that Ontario can come up with a long-term plan for doctors, for doctor shortages, and for nurses, PSWs, other folks that will be burnt out following COVID-19. We're providing stable, increasing, much more commitments than Mr. Trudeau has been promising, and we're not going to get into fights with the provinces. We want to make sure we work with them to tackle this need. And this is a real need, Catherine, because my area of Southern Ontario, in the Greater Toronto area, we've had doctor shortages as well. And families, seniors need a family physician. They need a health team or a nurse practitioner or someone that they can go to. So we will partner with the provinces with these historic investments to make sure that we deliver for you. And I really hope in your case, Catherine, that you find someone soon.
You are listening live to a telephone town hall with Erin O'Toole, the leader of Canada's Conservatives. If you have a question for him, press *3 on your phone now. Our next question comes from Nancy, and it's about the criminal justice system. Nancy, please go ahead with Erin.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole. I'm just calling in regards to the Bill C-75 in regards to the catch and release. I live in a community where people are arrested 5, 6, 7 times, and they go to jail, they get their name on the list, and then they're released. Like, we have to do something about the crime that is in some cities, especially our city, because it's a high opioid city that these people really need help, and I think locking them up, they can't get at it.
That's a great point, Nancy. You know, public safety is critical, which is why we've already announced that we're giving frontline police forces investments to tackle guns, gangs, and drug dealing. We're going to have 200 additional RCMP officers dedicated to that. We're going to work on border security to make sure that we stop some of the illegal flow of illegal firearms from the United States and drugs. The opioid epidemic is horrific to see the impact on families. It's heartbreaking. And some of the very dangerous forms of carfentanil and other things are something that we have to keep out of the country and work with border officials, particularly in BC, because a lot of it has come from mainland China. And when it comes to criminal justice, I have a very simple approach. For someone that has a mental health issue or an addiction issue or something of that nature that is not a violent offender, we need to get people treatment and help as much as possible. In those cases, it's not about prison. It's not about protecting the public from someone dangerous. It's about helping someone, particularly if they are struggling with an addiction. So we're going to make historic investments in addiction treatment, including specialized, specific, culturally sensitive training and support for Indigenous communities. On the other side, repeat violent offenders or people that prey on the vulnerable or are involved in human trafficking, we need to protect the public from those people. And that is where, particularly with repeat offenders, you will see a more serious approach to prison time, and in some cases, minimum penalties in the case of repeated offenses. Why Mr. Trudeau is completely out of step? He's actually lowering the criminal sentences for people that are using a firearm to commit violence or to threaten or intimidate someone, including repeat offenders. He's lowering the penalties. That's not how you promote safety or responsibility. So we're going to have a very, very straightforward approach. Show compassion and rehabilitation, where we can help people that aren't a violent threat to other people in our society. But if people are repeat violent offenders, we will be serious. This is not going to be a slap on the wrist and back on the street as you're describing, Nancy, because it's unsafe for our communities, and people that have shown they can be violent or prey on other Canadians, we need to protect Canadians from them.
So you're live on a telephone town hall with Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. You can press *3 to ask your question of Erin. And while we're talking about the justice system, Erin, I had the pleasure of serving in your shadow cabinet as your ethics critic. And I was, of course, honored to take the job. And my goodness, though, I don't think in our first discussion we anticipated just how busy we'd be in addressing the ethical, the serial ethical law breaking of Mr. Trudeau and members of his team. And so what can we do as a government to really address this issue of accountability in Ottawa?
Great question, Michael. And you were one of the busiest shadow ministers because this is a government led by Mr. Trudeau completely devoid of an ethical compass. And I often say leadership is about example. So can you imagine when the Prime Minister is constantly under personal ethical investigation, constantly misleading people as well? We saw that this week when Jody Wilson-Raybould's book had an excerpt saying he was pressuring her to lie. That is horrendous. That is a sign that there is a problem at the top of the Trudeau government, and it's Justin Trudeau. We have a Prime Minister that's been investigated for his personal decisions 3 times. That sets a tone. So we saw the We Charity scandal and his finance minister resign. So we have to constantly make sure that we are getting to the root of this entitlement and corruption problem, which is why the second pillar of Canada's recovery plan is an anti-corruption law. We're going to have more transparency. So groups like the We Charity, other organizations like Facebook and others that have sometimes lobbied the government and they don't even register their meeting, that will be required. And SNC-Lavalin, for example, will not be able to lobby to get out of a criminal penalty or a sanction. And we're going to have tough penalties assigned to breaches of the law. So Mr. Trudeau has been found guilty of the Ethics Act several times, but has never had any consequences of any note. We're going to have tough and serious penalties and fines, particularly if you're a repeat offender. And the cycle of cover-ups that we're seeing in this government, whether it's sexual misconduct in the military, whether it is the questions we've had about scientists with ties to the Chinese military getting access to our top virus lab in Winnipeg. Mr. Trudeau is always covering things up, always refusing to answer the question, and always blaming others. You know, Ms. Wilson-Raybould and other MPs just experience things differently, is what he says. No, Mr. Trudeau, you're often not truthful, and I think Canadians deserve better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on the issue of the Winnipeg lab. And, you know, we saw last summer with Justin Trudeau that tough questions were asked about the We Charity scandal. We had an incredible team of Conservatives who were really pressing on this issue. And when the questions got tough, Justin Trudeau shut down Parliament, prorogued it, really putting the business of the nation on hold for his own benefit during a pandemic. So here we are again. Well, the House of Commons was dealing with an issue where, in fact, Justin Trudeau was taking the Speaker of the House of Commons to court to stop the release of documents related to really serious questions about security in Winnipeg. And you've taken some action on that as well. But you know, if you could tell us a little about that, but also, what does that say about a Prime Minister who, when the going gets tough, he shuts down Parliament?
No, 100%. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, go on our Facebook or YouTube streams. Leave a question in the comments below. We're also going to get to your questions in a moment, hitting *3. But the Winnipeg lab situation should really concern Canadians. I think for the first time in the history of parliamentary democracies, including the UK and all others, The Prime Minister of Canada is going to court to refuse to follow the law, to just disclose what he knew about scientists that his government granted access to our virus lab. We found out the Winnipeg lab had been sharing virus samples with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, they're other forms, they're not a coronavirus, but why was this level of partnership even permitted with a country that has put our two citizens, the two Michaels, in prison? A country that is committing human rights abuses in its own country and in Hong Kong. So Mr. Trudeau, rather than just being forthright, is actually now using the courts to cover up his own conduct. It's really unprecedented. That's why I had to actually go to court to try and intervene to do my job to hold him to account. Well, the best way to hold Mr. Trudeau to account, and a government that's constantly under investigation, constantly hiding things from Canadians, is to replace that government. And that's what this election will allow us to do.
Absolutely. If you're just joining our call, you are live with Conservative Leader Erin O'Toole. And if you have a question for him, press *3 on the phone now. Our next question comes from John. He's a small business owner, has a question about our plan. John, you are live with Erin O'Toole right now.
Hi, John.
Good evening. Hi, Mr. O'Toole. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your service, for being in the Canadian military for so many years. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. I do own a small business currently, and this pandemic has actually been pretty bad for me and a whole bunch of other small businesses that I do work for as well. My question is, or I have two questions actually. One question is, what's your plan for small business in general, large corporation? What kind of grants were you thinking of producing, if there are any? I really didn't qualify for any of the government grants that Mr. Trudeau had out for us. You can, with my laughter, you can obviously assume that I really don't care for the guy, but that's just me. Secondly, the last question is, what's your plan for Canadian recovery? With all the talks going on, I do see that you're actually answering questions, which is great. Every time Mr. Trudeau has a question, he tends to stop and just go blind and say, we're just here for the people, and he goes into his whole rehearsed speech and never answers a question properly.
You nailed it. John, can I ask what area of the economy your business is?
I own a sign company and promotional company.
Okay.
In London, Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually I went to the early polls and I voted for Mr. Flack. So.
Oh, well, outstanding. Well, listen, Rob Flack is an outstanding person, a great community booster, and someone that has grown a business and employed more people from when he started. So someone that will fight. So let me say a few things, John. We hear you. Small business owners across the country are uncertain about the future. Many of them have taken on personal debt in their family to keep the business going. And depending on what industry, some services and hospitality and others, they can't find employees because of the current situation with no change to our recovery programs in the fourth wave from the first wave. So we have several things we're going to do, and I invite you. It's on page 21 of Canada's Recovery Plan. That's our plan for the recovery, Canada's Recovery Plan. And we have the Main Street Business Loan that will have a granting portion that we want more Canadian businesses to qualify for. And this will be up to $200,000 maximum. And because we found the CEBA, the business account, as you said, there's many people like you, John, that didn't qualify for it. And it wasn't enough in some cases for highly affected sectors. We're going to have a tax credit so that other Canadians can rebuild and invest in businesses that are rebuilding. We're going to have an investment accelerator. So if you're modernizing, purchasing equipment, becoming more productive, we're going to let you accelerate the depreciation of that. And we're going to try and make sure that we help highly affected sectors that are really going to be struggling longer, like tourism, travel, hospitality. So we have a number of programs focused exclusively on helping you, because 2/3 of Canadians either own, co-own, or work for a small or medium-sized business. 2/3. So if we see a lot of them not survive, we will see prolonged unemployment challenges. So under Mr. Trudeau, Canada's spent more per capita than the G7, but has one of the highest unemployment rates. And we were already losing jobs and investment, running huge deficits, $100 billion worth of debt pretty much before COVID started. So we were already sliding down and in trouble in terms of our prosperity. So we want to boost that, and Canada's recovery plan is that. And so, John, please tell other small businesses help is on the way. It's by voting Conservative.
For those of you who are just joining us, you're listening to a live telephone town hall with Erin O'Toole, the leader of Canada's Conservatives. If you have a question for Erin, press *3 on the phone now. Our next question comes from Ella in Sault Ste. Marie, and it's about her question's about the opioid crisis. Ella in the Sioux, you are live with Erin O'Toole.
Good evening, Mr. O'Toole.
Hi, Ella.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing very well, and I'm hoping to get up to the Sioux to see Sonny Spina, a good friend and an outstanding person that I hope will be the MP on September 20th.
He absolutely is. He absolutely is. He's a kind man and very honest.
Yes.
I'm asking tonight a couple of things. We talk about the opioid crisis, but nothing seems to be happening. I'm a senior. I've recently been widowed, and I have fear of living on my own in my home. Constantly my car is being broke into, my shed's being broke into, and it's just accumulating. If I go for a coffee, there's really sad people there begging for money. And I want to know, when are we going to be able to expect some treatment centers, some counseling, and perhaps in the end some housing for these people?
Well, thank you, Ella, for the question. And the opioid crisis is heartbreaking. And I remember about 8 months ago, I showed my kids a cover of a newspaper that had photos of people that had died in the previous year from opioid overdose. Most were very young. And in some cases, some of them were the first time they ever tried the drug, the fentanyl, the carfentanil. And it's heartbreaking to see futures and lives snuffed out. So we have to do something. There's obviously, as I said, keeping some of the dangerous supply and other things out of Canada, but this addiction we have to treat as a health issue. So in Westminster, BC, and BC has been kind of the epicenter of the crisis, I announced a $325 million investment to have 1,000 treatment beds that will allow us to start helping people on a route to treatment. We're also going to make an historic $1 billion investment over 5 years for Indigenous-related treatment and mental health programming, because there's some unique issues that are part of the legacy of residential schools that we have to tackle. We also, with this investment, will have 50 community centers for treatment and connecting people with help. So there's a very good chance that Sault Ste. Marie might be one of those where we can plug in the people with treatment and support to help them. We've got to help people. This is a health crisis. And then, as I said, keep the supply and the dealers and the people that prey on people with addiction, focus our criminal justice measures at those people, not somebody with an addiction. And we've had great feedback on this major initiative where we will partner with other levels of government and nonprofits to provide help and treatment. I also, Ella, I'm sorry to hear you're recently widowed, and we want to give more options for you. So we have measures to help seniors in terms of accessibility stay in their home. We also have a measure that will help families that decide to take in an aging parent. We want to give as many options as possible, including working with the provinces to improve long-term care so that people can stay in their home, stay with family, and make options for a safe retirement. And I want to thank you, Ella, for sharing your personal story with us tonight.
For those of you who are just joining us, you are live listening to Conservative Leader Erin O'Toole. Take your questions. If you want Erin to answer your question, press *3 on the phone. Now, before we take the next caller, if you haven't already completed our survey, you can do that. If you're going to be voting Conservative in this election, or if you've already voted Conservative in this election during advance polls, you can press 1 on your handset now. If you're voting for one of the other parties, press 2. And if you still haven't made up your mind, press 3. Our next call comes from Andrew in Kitchener. And Andrew has a question about battling climate change. Andrew, please go ahead now.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. I'm a new voter. I'm 18 years old, and one of the problems I see, I guess, major global crisis is, climate change. And I'm just kind of wondering what kind of ideas you have, maybe, because obviously climate change is a problem that involves all of us, not just Canada. So I'm just kind of thinking, what ideas do you have for working with our allies in battling climate change?
Thanks, Andrew. And I love the way you talk about it. We do have to battle climate change, and Canada has to play our role. And I think we need a plan to meet our Paris commitments, our reduction targets to get greenhouse gas emissions down. And in April, I launched a plan to do that. In fact, before an election, Mr. Trudeau said a few words about his climate change plan back in 2014, 2015. I launched the most comprehensive and detailed plan that has a price on carbon, that also has an approach on electric vehicles, on technology, including carbon capture and sequestration, hydrogen. It's a very comprehensive policy that we worked with experts to try and make sure we meet our commitments alongside our allies, and we also make sure our economy does well. And I would invite you, Andrew, to check it out. You can go on the conservative.ca and check out Canada's recovery plan. And I've been honest, and I think it's important for leaders to be honest. This is an area where we didn't meet the expectations of Canadians in the last 2 elections, so we're working hard to make sure we do. Particularly young voters, they want to see a Conservative Party rising to meet the challenges of 2021. And that's why we put it out in April, to be very straightforward that, to me, climate change is important. I worked on environmental issues as a volunteer and as a lawyer in the private sector before I became a politician. My daughter's 15, a few years younger than you, and literally the most important issue for her is this one. And I wouldn't be a good dad if I didn't have a good policy to really make our goals. And the difference between Mr. Trudeau and myself, he will say anything, never has a plan to deliver. I often say he's good at the photo ops, not good at the follow-ups. And when you ask him about it, it's always someone else's fault. He's still blaming Mr. Harper. He's blaming other people. People experience things differently. That's not what he said. You know, we've already made our targets, he's telling some people, and that's not true. He hasn't. So this is going to be a big challenge we all have to rise to meet. We have to battle it, as you said, Andrew. So I've said, here's our battle plan. We're going to deliver on it because it's important for Canada to play our role, and this is a battle the whole world has to wage for our future.
You're listening to a live telephone town hall with Conservative Leader Erin O'Toole. You can ask Erin a question by pressing *3, and our next question comes from, well, right here in Ottawa, Nepean, and it's Doug. He has a question about drinking water for Canada's first people. Doug, please go ahead with your question for Erin now.
Good evening, sir. First of all, I have a statement I'd like to make to you, and I'm sure you'll agree. I think, in my personal opinion, that Trudeau is an absolute disgrace to this country and to himself. That's my personal opinion. I want you to know I am half Native. My mother was a full-blooded Mi'kmaq. My flesh is white, but the blood in my vein is that of the Mi'kmaq Indian. And I would like to know, what are you going to do to help the Indigenous people to finally get some clear, clean drinking water?
Well, thank you, Doug. This is an area that I think all governments historically, going back to the earliest days of our country, have failed, and including Conservative and Liberal. And for us to restore trust, to earn the trust of Indigenous peoples, we have to have a plan to tackle these issues. And I try and be as honest as possible when it comes to all issues, but this one in particular, I know Mr. Trudeau cares about reconciliation. But this is an area, just like Andrew's question on climate change, if you promise something and then don't deliver, you're actually eroding trust. And at its core, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is about restoring trust between the federal government and First Nations and Indigenous peoples. So what I want to do on the drinking water file is it's a human right. So this is an area where our country is failing. So I'm going to partner with First Nation governments. I'm going to partner with Indigenous-led supply chain businesses, and we're going to tackle this step by step until there are zero. And this is about also holding me to account for this commitment. So I'm going to have governance reviewing how the federal government does with Indigenous leaders a part of it. I've talked to many Indigenous organizations and leaders about this new approach, because I'll tell you, Ottawa is not getting it done. Mr. Trudeau did not get it done. And I want to build partnerships so that we are not only making steady progress right from our first 100 days in office, but I also want to be held to account by this generation that is out there of incredible Indigenous leaders in business, in academia, in public life, in nonprofit. We should be tapping that expertise so that we can reform how we deliver on reconciliation. And Doug, this is important. I think it should be beyond politics, to be honest with you. And it's also why my first question when I rose to my feet in the House of Commons as opposition leader, my first question was on reconciliation.
If you have a question for Erin O'Toole, press *3 now. Our next question comes from Amanda, and her question is about the Canadian Forces and Afghanistan. Amanda, please go ahead with your question for Erin.
Hi, Erin. I'm a very proud military wife, and I would like to know what you can do to bring the proudness back to our military and what your thoughts are on Afghanistan, how we could have handled that better.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for serving. I have a very big soft spot, as Michael knows, for military families. When I left the military, I'd met my wife, Rebecca, when I was still in uniform in the Air Force, but we didn't have children. And I saw the challenges when our Sea King would deploy with our ship and go to sea, particularly folks that had kids. That was tough on families, posting to other provinces, in some cases where they couldn't get similar coverage for a child with autism or something like that. There was a strain, particularly when we were at war in Afghanistan or when mom or dad was deployed. So that was part of the reason I helped start the True Patriot Love Foundation with some other passionate Canadians so that we could help show that other Canadians wanted to support families that serve. So thank you, Amanda, for your family serving. In terms of the Canadian Armed Forces, we have a detailed plan in here that will prioritize getting our men and women the equipment they need to do the job. That's Army, Navy, Air Force, and in the process, fixing procurement. We see, particularly under the Liberals, whether it's submarines, whether it's the Sea King helicopter that I know pretty well, whether it's the next generation fighter aircraft. They're used politically. We end up paying huge amounts of contractual penalties and more money, or we get submarines that have never really worked. We are giving our men and women used CF-18s or F-18s from Australia. Quite frankly, it's wrong, and it puts lives at risk and is not what Canada needs to do. So that will be a priority. And on Afghanistan, Amanda, I was in Vancouver the other day and saw an Afghan veteran friend of mine, Tim, a group of veterans, because Mr. Trudeau has been completely absent the last 6 months, he's ignored people's pleas about the hundreds, if not thousands, of people stranded in Afghanistan and at risk from the Taliban. This group of veterans has raised $1.3 million, and they're working themselves with volunteer groups and with the Americans and others to get people out. Something Mr. Trudeau should be doing. Instead of calling an election, do your job and get people out of Kabul, get people out of Afghanistan, to see people running to aircraft, climbing on aircraft, and Mr. Trudeau calling an election, it is a complete absence of leadership. And I know it's been hard for Afghan veterans who have their translator or their contractor stuck there, sending them messages through Facebook saying, my life is at risk. Canadians don't leave people behind. That's not the Canada of Vimy Ridge, Juno Beach, or Kandahar. And so, as Prime Minister, I will make sure we never leave people behind.
So I'm going to touch on that quickly. Erin, you've mentioned, of course, that you served in our Air Force, and you know that I served in the Army. And like you were talking to one of your veteran friends on the weekend, I hear from mine often, and they want to know what we do differently. They're interested and, of course, excited that we have in a Conservative leader a former Minister of Veterans Affairs who did good things for our vets. But what's a Conservative government going to do to support our veterans? And so this is a question that I get really often, and I'd be remiss in my duty to my brothers and sisters in uniform if I didn't give you a chance to talk about our plan.
Well, thank you for your service, Michael. And I love on these town halls, people will often thank me for my service. And I took such incredible experiences out of the military and didn't leave with any serious injury, physical or mental. And so I think we have to serve our veterans who do leave with a service injury, physical or mental. And I've worked every day since I left the military, either as a volunteer through True Patriot Love, as a backbench MP when Romeo Dallaire and I started partnering on mental health initiatives, right through to when I was Minister of Veterans Affairs. And we made huge progress in under a year because I brought a team together, we set priorities, and we delivered. I never made promises I couldn't keep. And that earned trust over time. So some veterans who had been suing the government, once we built that trust, they stopped their lawsuit for a time. That will be my approach, partnering, making progress. And right now, there's a huge backlog. Again, something I had worked hard to get down for benefit and claim review, particularly for mental health. We also need to have far more service options for people with mental injuries from service. If you have a physical injury, the treatment is usually well known. If it's a mental injury from service, sometimes you'll have to try 2 or 3 things before something works. And when I was minister, we pushed out service dogs. We had equine therapy. We tried to support more peer-based therapy. And I want families to be able to access supports for an OSI, an operational stress injury in the family. So those are 2 key areas that we have to get wait times down, as much as possible, have all benefits secured and sorted out before the person even hangs up their uniform and becomes a veteran. And we have to continue to expand mental health treatment. The 3rd pillar of our Canada Recovery Plan is mental health. From my veteran work, Michael, I've seen if you can reduce the stigma and start treating mental health issues just as a regular health issue, you can sometimes avoid addiction issues. You can avoid family breakups. You can avoid loss of work if you get the people help early. So there's going to be some lingering challenges our country faces after COVID on a mental health front. That's why our National Mental Health Action Plan is going to try and show federal leadership to tackle that.
If you're just joining our call, you're listening to Conservative Leader Erin O'Toole answer your questions live. If you have a question for Erin, press *3 now. And if you want to let us know how you're going to be voting in this election, you can indicate on your keypad. Press 1 if you're voting Conservative, press 2 if you're voting for one of the other parties, or press 3 if you're still undecided. Our next question, Erin, comes from Brandy, who has a question about our plan to get people back to work. Brandy, please go ahead. You're live now.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. I'm glad to stay on the line. First and foremost, I cannot wait for Trudeau to get out. I am not big on somebody who breaks their promises. It's not something I do, and I don't believe in it. He was voted for the people, by the people, and I think he forgets where he got his job from. Okay, that's my say on that. Also, fully back our veterans. They fought for the freedom that we're so quickly losing, which absolutely disgusts me. But my question is for, what is the Conservative government going to do for your middle class people? people who make more than minimum wage, who contribute the majority of taxes towards the government. I'm taxed to death. My husband is taxed to death. We are both fighting to stay ahead, and the cost of everything is going through the roof. The cost of us to get to work, the cost that it is for us to sustain the vehicles, to buy groceries, to put our kids through school. My kids, please don't take this the wrong way, are just average white children. No cuts, no breaks, no nothing. They don't get help, they don't get handouts, they don't get anything. So I'd like to know what the Conservative government is going to do for the middle class. Because right now, the government is cutting out the middle class, and I don't know if you've ever seen a building without the middle in it. The top just comes down on the bottom, and you end up with nothing.
Well, thanks, Brandy. I can hear the emotion in your voice about how the costs are going up, and I hear this regularly. It's probably the top issue I've heard every day of this campaign, whether we're talking to my candidates doing these telephone town halls or when I'm chatting with people directly. The cost of living crisis is out of control, the housing crisis, but just gas is going up, groceries is going up, people just finished back to school shopping, everything is going up, and wages aren't going up. So we're doing a few things to tackle this cost of living crisis, Brandy. The biggest one, a major initiative, has the equivalent of giving working Canadians a $1 per hour raise. We're doubling the Canada Worker Benefit. That's going to give many families thousands more each year to try and keep up. And we're going to give this throughout the year so that they can count on it. We're also going to try and really focus efforts on businesses that are rebuilding and encourage them to hire people that have been unemployed. We're calling it the jobs boost because we need to get everyone working again so that we can tackle the shrinking economy. Under Mr. Trudeau, our economy is shrinking. Our debt is at record levels, and he's raising taxes, and inflation is causing prices to skyrocket. People are being squeezed, and I can hear it in your voice. So we want to give a bit of relief. We have some plans to get some of your bills down on internet and mobile phone to try and get some downward pressure on grocery bills. We're going to have a GST holiday in December, allow people that little extra room for a few presents under the tree, and help bricks and mortar retailers at the same time. We have a Dine and Discover program to help people with a little bit of eating out, keep a little money in your pocket, but also help the hard-hit hospitality sector. In fact, I've seen some liberal people on social media mocking these programs. Anytime we can give Canadians a break, we're going to do it. Mr. Trudeau wants to tax you more and more and more. His economic failures is driving this skyrocketing cost of living crisis we're in. So I want you to know, particularly the Canada Workers Benefit, this is a major initiative that we're working on. It's also, Brandy, why we want to make sure we help all families immediately with childcare decisions so that if there's a shift worker, and Michael, you and I were talking about that, some of the shift workers at 3M in your community, they need flexibility in their childcare plans, and lower income families need more support, so we're going to have an approach to cover up to 75% of those costs. So we know you need a break, and that's what Canada's Recovery Plan is all about.
If you're just joining us, you're listening live to Questions and Answers with the Leader of Canada's Conservatives, Erin O'Toole. And if you have a question for Erin that you'd like him to answer, you can press *3 and you can ask him that question live. Our next question comes from Brian. He's been waiting on the line for quite a while. Thank you for your patience, Brian. And this question, Erin, is about voting during a pandemic. Brian, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, Mr. O'Toole, I appreciate the fact that you are running, and it takes a lot of strength, no matter who's leading which party. It takes a lot of work, and I kind of praise the fact that you are running. I am a senior. I noticed what we got during the pandemic, $500 check from the federal government, of which we're going to be taxed on. Today, I went to vote, pre-vote in Welland. And when I got there at the pre-vote station, there was a 2.5-hour wait. Now, being over 70, okay, I can handle that. But being over 80, some people with 60s or 50s having a hard time standing in line for 2.5 hours in the sun outside. Trudeau called this election for personal reasons. I think he should never have called it when we have this massive illness going on in the world. The election is going to cost $600 million, and I don't know where we're going with it, other than the fact we're getting to know you and we see what kind of a good guy you are, and that's one good positive point. But the other point is, it's a waste of money as far as I'm concerned, but we're probably going to find out from the election that the PCs will win, hopefully, and people are getting ticked off with what they're getting from the Liberal government, especially seniors. I want to know your opinion on that, what you could do to help people that worked and built this country and are now retired on fixed incomes, looking at taxes going higher and higher, that their houses they might not be able to afford in the future. What's your opinion on that? What you can do to help them? And what's your opinion on, I know what your opinion is on the early election, but your opinion regarding voting stations where people have to stand for 2.5 hours without chairs. Bring your own pencil. Like, what kind of who wants to stand there to vote and wait and wait? Many people probably got home. We're not going to have a very large turnout on this election because of that factor and because it was called during the pandemic. Okay, I'll wait for your view on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for going out and waiting in line, and thanks for waiting on the call tonight. You're 100% right. I don't think we should be in an election. In fact, Parliament had a vote. Let's not have an election during the pandemic. Mr. Trudeau said no election during the pandemic until he thought he could get an election in and reward himself. That's wrong, as you said. Think of what we could do with the $600 million. There's several more years left in this Parliament, and he basically had a working Parliament because the NDP said they were never going to vote against. So he did this only for himself, and I hope people see that we're tired of Mr. Trudeau always putting his own friends and his own self-interest ahead of the interests of the country. And Graham Speck is a great candidate in Welland, in our area there, so I hope he gets your support. What we need to do is get the cost of the living crisis under control, because as Brandy just said, Brian, it is hurting working families, it's hurting seniors, particularly on fixed income. You're not seeing that pension income rise, but you're seeing property taxes go up. You're seeing all your bills go up. You're seeing gas go up. Everything is going up except for what's coming in terms of revenue. So we're doing a number of things to try and get the pressure down on some of those bills. As I said earlier, wireless, cellular, we have plans to get prices down through more competition and other measures, hopefully downward pressure on grocery bills as well. Give you a break on the GST with a holiday in December that will also help bricks and mortar stores. We also have a number of programs to give you a tax credit to work on home accessibility for seniors staying in their own home, and then a number of programs to help if someone moves in with a family member, an older aging parent with family, a benefit for the family, and major investments in long-term care, allowing the provinces to do infrastructure improvements, and a record investment in our public health care system. We're also going to expand, as I said earlier, the Canada Workers Benefit, a disability tax program. So depending on what a senior might qualify for, we want to make sure that you have more money at the end of the day, Brian. You're right, you did build this country, and we want to make sure you have dignity, safety, and security in retirement.
For those of you who are just joining us, you're listening to a live telephone town hall with Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. He's taking your questions live. You just need to press *3 and we'll take your question. Our next question comes from Rhonda, and her question is about Bill C-10 from the last session of Parliament. Rhonda, please go ahead with your question for Erin O'Toole.
Great. Thank you. Mr. O'Toole, first, thank you for actually answering questions posed to you in the debate series and for actually wearing your Canada flag pin. People do notice that. My question is about Bill C-10. It has me a bit worried. The Trudeau government is selling it as a tax for Netflix and Twitter. I'm concerned about the other implications that this bill also has on our freedom of speech. Can you help clarify what is Bill C-10?
Yes, I'd be happy to, Rhonda, and thank you for the compliments. I do try and answer the questions. I'm very proud to wear, I either wear this pin or a little veteran pin I have that's also the maple leaf. C-10, the Liberals said, was an attempt to level the playing field between the American web giants, you know, the Googles, Amazons, those sort of players, and Canadian industry, particularly cultural and artistic communities, which are important to defining Canada. But they changed the bill at the last moment to an extent that would allow the CRTC or Ottawa to regulate your social media feed, or what you saw, or what could be commented or posted to it. And of course, people have been using social media for many years, and there's an expectation that this isn't regulated like you are a broadcaster like CTV or CBC. It's your social media account. And the Liberals changed it at the last minute without any discussion. And sorry, after 6 years, Mr. Trudeau, I don't trust you when you make changes like this to grow big government. So I've often said, I want to balance the playing field too. I'm proud of our content producers. I'm proud of our artists. You can level the playing field from a tax and a regulation and a content level without giving some department in Ottawa the ability to monitor or change your social media feed, Rhonda. That was the issue we had with the bill, and the fact that they tried to sneak this in at the end really had people concerned. It was an erosion of liberties at a time where we should be making sure that people have trust in the government and that there's not any erosion of abilities for people to post and have things on their social media account. So what we've said is we will fix this. We will level the playing field without this big government approach of regulating. And what's interesting, because Mr. Trudeau had prorogued Parliament to cover up the WE scandal, Michael talked about that later, he ran out of time before his pandemic election. He was clearly planning an election, and he didn't pass a number of bills, which in this case I think is good. The Senate started having major concerns, even Liberal senators, and several former directors of the CRTC actually expressed the same concerns we did. So we will always stand up for getting the balance right, Rhonda, and we certainly don't need regulation of people's social media feeds. We can balance the playing field without doing that.
For those of you just joining us, you can press *3 if you want to ask your question live to the Leader of Canada's Conservatives, Erin O'Toole. And our next question comes from Tom in North Bay, and Tom has a question about home equity. Tom, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, Tom. Are you there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was live.
No problem.
I'm here. So my question, Mr. O'Toole, nice speaking with you this evening, was that my wife and I both have small businesses. We're getting older, approaching retirement. We've had to invest in real estate just to, build some sort of a retirement income of sorts. We're hearing that there's a possibility that the Liberal government wants to introduce some sort of a home equity tax. And I know you don't agree with that, but my question is if that's the way he thinks he's got to get tax dollars from Canadians, is there another way that you would do to get to the same end?
Well, thanks, Tom. We share this concern as well, because there's a lot of advisors to the Liberals and even some of their candidates saying that they have to do this to fight the housing crisis. No, people save for their retirement through the value in their primary residence, and that needs to be defended. It's been a way that the middle class has not only built their home equity and then they rely on that later in life, and with people living longer, we need to make sure that we secure that. And there are a different set of rules for commercial properties, obviously, when it's not your primary residence. but we have a policy in our plan to try and keep more rental housing. We will allow someone who has a commercial property, if they sell it but reinvest into another commercial property, we'd let them roll over the capital gain so that we would keep more properties being built and invested in, because right now the housing crisis is very acute for first-time home buyers that simply can't afford a home, but we're also seeing not enough rental options. This is something I've seen in my own region, in the Durham region, people that can't rent or can't afford. So we need to tackle that. But Tom, on the home equity piece, the Liberals have something on page 14 of their policy document suggesting that they're going to be introducing some form of this. And if they're just reiterating what exists for commercial buildings, why don't they just come out and say that? What we are concerned about is some of their advisors are saying they need to do this to get their out of control spending under control, and we will fight tooth and nail to allow people to maintain the equity in their own home. It's something that people need for retirement. We also, as I said throughout the call tonight, Tom, and I appreciate your patience, we want to give you as much of a break as possible because we know the cost of living is going up. We know bills are going up, so we have a number of policies to get those pressures down and to give you a break.
If you'd like to share with us how you're going to be voting in the election, you can press 1 on your keypad now if you're going to be voting Conservative, press 2 if you're voting for one of the other parties, or press 3 if you're undecided. And if you have a question for Erin O'Toole, you can press *3 and ask him your question live. Our next question is about healthcare, and it comes from Deanna. Deanna, please go ahead with your question for Erin O'Toole now.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Nice of you doing this. You answered a lot of questions that I had before. My question is on health care. My husband's been waiting for surgery for over 2 years now, so we called the surgeon just to get an update on when he will have surgery. And on their voicemail, it said, if you have this, this, and this, we'll call you back in 4 months. If you have this and this and this wrong, we'll call you back in 16 months. Now, I've seen the advertisements months ago about how the Conservatives are going to cut health care. And I've also heard that the Conservatives are going to cut health care when the pandemic is over. What is your answer to this?
Thank you, Deanna. My answer is don't listen to Liberal misinformation. In fact, it's been very disappointing that Mr. Trudeau each week tries to mislead people. They've even been flagged on the internet, on social media, for misleading people. We're used to seeing that in the United States. We're not used to seeing that here. Why does it frustrate me, Deanna, is this document, Canada's Recovery Plan. You can't see it because you're on the telephone town hall, but if you're on Facebook, you can. I'll give you a thud here. That's our document. It was launched on the first full day of the campaign. It announces our record almost $60 billion investment in our public universal healthcare system. We've relied on it in the pandemic, and as you pointed out, the surgical backlogs, the waiting list means we need long-term increasing investments. So we are going to do that. Stable, predictable funding for the provinces without dictating what they have to do with it, because in some provinces, and we talked about earlier, we had one lady that called in not being able to find a family doctor. We have surgical backlogs. It must be frustrating for your husband to know that they're going to wait months and months and months. We need to get these backlogs and give the support on our front lines. So that predictable funding, 6% minimum increase per year, that allows provinces to plan. And what I dislike about Mr. Trudeau, not only misleading people with respect to me and what the Conservatives want to do, when he says that he's going to hire doctors with his announcements on healthcare, that's not true. The federal government does not run the provincial healthcare system. So they can transfer money and say that they hope that money will go to hiring doctors, but they have to respect the provinces making their decisions about their system. And in Ontario especially, there are some unique shortages and needs. There's a diversity of issues in Northern Ontario versus Southern Ontario. There's doctor shortages. There's backlogs in surgery. we will have a minimum of 6% growth per year, and our hope is that it can be larger than that because we have an ambitious economic recovery plan as well. So Deanna, Canada's recovery plan is based on the health and economic well-being of our country. We need to get our country back on its feet, and we need to make sure your husband can get that surgery faster, and by us giving record money to the provinces, including to Ontario, that will help facilitate that.
Our next question comes from Paul, and Paul's question is about the commitment to recover 1 million jobs. Paul, please go ahead with your question for Erin O'Toole.
Hi, Paul.
No, that's me. I'm not sure if it was me he was talking about, but I was wondering about all those jobs, million jobs. You're going to get them back. How are you going to get them back, and what's it going to cost us in order to do that?
Well, that's a great question. What we've said is we want to recover the 1 million jobs lost in the pandemic and more. Some have come back. Some have come back only part-time. And right now we have a very, very challenging situation that Mr. Trudeau has created, which is record debt, high unemployment in some areas, and labor shortages in other areas. Why is that? Because he has not changed the COVID response programs between the first wave of the pandemic, when we weren't sure what was hitting our country. We weren't sure if all business sectors would collapse or what would happen. He didn't change. We're in the fourth wave now, and some businesses that had record profits were getting taxpayer dollars. Some people, including 15-year-old dependents of their parents, were being paid not to work. They don't have any dependents. They're living with their parents. Why did we spend hundreds of millions of dollars paying taxpayer money to them? So Mr. Trudeau, one of his biggest failures in the pandemic was adapting. And that's something I've learned in the military and in business. You have to adapt. You have to use your resources smart. So what we're going to do, Paul, is help the highly impacted sectors: hospitality, travel tourism, some of the services business. In Southern Ontario, some of the closures that some services businesses, nail salons, barbers, hairdressers, are some of the largest periods of closures in North America. There's small business owners, and we heard from John tonight about small businesses in crisis. So we're going to give them the support to make sure they survive. Because if we see a range of failures, we're going to see chronic unemployment. We are also going to have some strategic programs to boost development of intellectual property in Canada. We want to see innovation. We want to see more companies stay here. So our economic plan on the 1 million jobs is very ambitious, but it's about getting our country back on its feet. Why is that so important, Paul? The fifth pillar of our plan, getting back to balance of our budget in the course of the next decade. We need this country working. We can't just continue to extend the CERB and other benefits indefinitely, because it's not sustainable. It's leading to inflation, and it's leading to some businesses closing down or leaving Canada because in some cases they can't even find employees. So we're going to help working families. We're going to get the country working and target highly impacted sectors that are going to have a slower recovery from COVID.
Folks, you're listening to Conservative Leader Erin O'Toole take your questions live. And our next question comes from Kevin in Fort Saskatchewan. And Kevin has been serving in the military. Thank you for your service, Kevin. Please go ahead with your question for Erin O'Toole.
Good evening, Mr. O'Toole. It's great to have the opportunity to speak with you, and I've been listening for a while. There's a lot of great questions, and it's impressive to see a Canadian leader that can actually answer a question. So thank you for that. I guess my question, which I could have several of them. I'm a long-serving military member with over 32 years of service, and 2 tours to Afghanistan, 2 to Bosnia. And my original question was already been answered by you, so I quickly had to switch up. But anyways, as a soldier, what's important to me is standing up for the freedoms that we have as Canadians, and I know you can understand that. And so I guess my question would be is that how would the Conservative Party and yourself as its leader protect the freedom of speech and the freedom of choice in Canada going forward as we form government? Thank you, sir.
Well, first off, thank you, Kevin. 32 years, tours in Bosnia, Afghanistan. Wow, you have given incredible service to our country, and we're in your debt. You're still serving, so thank you. And you probably heard earlier some of our discussion, and Michael served with the Army, our commitments to the Canadian Armed Forces, military families, and veterans. I would be the first military veteran to become Prime Minister since Lester Pearson, and it's something that is important to who I am, that service. It let me serve alongside some incredible people. It let me see the country, and it let me know how to plan and form teams, and our mission now is to get the country back on track. And fundamental liberties and rights are a part of that. Freedom of speech, we talked earlier, Rhonda's question about C-10. It's very easy to balance off some tax and regulation policy between the American web giants while still protecting freedom of speech. We can have difficult debates in Canada, but do it respectfully. When it comes to choice, I'm pro-choice. I'm an ally to the LGBTQ community. And Kevin, my service in uniform actually formulated my views on many of these issues because I served alongside people from every creed, color, faith, orientation, who were putting their country first, like you are. And so when I got into politics, I'm here to defend people's rights, all of them, and to make sure we have a more prosperous country and that Canada plays its role in the world, that alongside our allies and alongside our values. So that formulates my position as a pro-choice ally. And I also defend freedom of speech, conscience and religious freedom. We need to make sure that we defend the rights of working Canadians. That's why I've been reaching out to unions. There are rights with respect to collective action, and I want to respect that as building a better country for all Canadians. So it's why we launched our platform on the first full day of the campaign. It's why I'm relentlessly optimistic about our future. We're a great country. I'm very proud of this country, but we've got to have a plan to tackle our economic and health challenges coming out of COVID, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. So thank you, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Erin. Canada's Conservatives are ready to deliver Canada's recovery plan and to stand up for families in Ontario and for all Canadians. And that's why I'm glad you're leading Canada's Conservatives in this election. Canada would be well served by a Prime Minister from Ontario, someone who understands the challenges that you and your family are facing because he grew up here and he's raising his family here. Folks, we hope you found tonight's conversation useful. If Erin O'Toole and Canada's Conservatives can count on your vote, please press 1. If you're supporting another party, please press 2. And if you're still unsure of how you're going to vote, please press 3. And if you didn't have a chance to ask your question, please stay on the line. Leave a message for our staff. Your question is really important, and we'd like the chance to get back to you. Erin?
Well, first off, thank you, Michael. You're becoming a pro at being our town hall moderator and a pro at handling all the ethical challenges Mr. Trudeau gave you. I need to give you a break, so we need to win the next election so that you're not constantly having to deal with these ethical scandals. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, everyone on the telephone town hall, or if you've joined on Facebook or YouTube. If you like what you've heard, you have half an hour to vote in advance polls, or 28 minutes. So go out there. Brian told us about the lineups in Welland. Maybe the lineups are a little lower now. But too many Canadians in Ontario and across the country really have been left behind and constantly disappointed by Justin Trudeau. And the NDP doesn't have any solutions for the future. It's time to get Ontario's economy back on track. It's time to get the country working and to unite this country again. Together, with our recovery plan, we can lower prices for families and seniors. We can tackle the housing crisis. We can build better internet connectivity, broadband. We can cut wait times and find doctors for some of the folks that are looking by partnering with the provinces. And we can work hard and ethically to secure the future for all Canadians. So please check out our website. Look us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any questions, please send them to us because we want to earn your support. Thank you for participating in our telephone town hall tonight. Best wishes of health to you and your family. Vote to secure the future. Vote Conservative. Thank you very much.